The docking bay on Verax Reach smelled like burnt fuel and something sweet that nobody could ever identify. It came from the vents. Nobody fixed the vents. That was the kind of place Verax Reach was functional enough that people kept coming back, broken enough that nobody stayed longer than they had to. Dara Ness was on her knees beside the Ardent Crow's rear landing strut, running a calibration tool along the fuel coupling. She was not in a hurry. She had learned a long time ago that people who looked like they were in a hurry got noticed. People who looked like they were doing maintenance got ignored. 2 bays over, a pair of Vrethkai merchants were talking in low voices. Vrethkai were tall, scaled, and built like something that had survived a planet that tried very hard to kill them. They usually kept to their own kind. They usually did not talk near other species if they were discussing anything important. Usually. Dara did not look up. She kept moving the calibration tool slowly, the way someone would if they were checking a stubborn reading. Her ears did the rest. The words she caught were pieces: convoy, Ocean route, 6-hour window, suppressants. The last word landed differently than the others. Suppressants meant medicine. Ocean route meant the supply line running to Ocean IV, a colony world that had been fighting a respiratory sickness for 8 months. Dara had carried food rations to Ocean IV twice in the last year. She knew what the colony looked like. She knew how the children there breathed. She kept working. The Vrethkai finished their conversation and walked away without once looking at the human crouched by the landing strut. That was normal. Humans on Verax Reach were background. They were cargo pilots and small-time traders and occasionally tourists who had taken a wrong turn somewhere. The Compact had classified Earth as a Tier 3 developing world. That classification meant not worth watching closely. Dara finished her calibration check, packed her tool case, and filed a departure request through the standard terminal near the bay door. She listed her next destination as Pallor Station, 3 jumps out. Routine cargo run, nothing interesting. The station approved her departure in 4 minutes. Nobody flagged her. Nobody asked questions. She walked back to the Ardent Crow, climbed in, sealed the hatch, and sat in the pilot's seat for a moment without starting the engines. She was thinking, not panicking. She had grown up in a city that flooded twice before she turned 12, and panic had never once stopped the water from rising. She was simply thinking about what she had and what she needed and how much time she had to work with. What she had: a ship with a stealth shroud built into its hull from 3 years of salvage work. A hold with 2 cases of emergency-grade plague suppressants she had picked up 4 months ago and had been meaning to sell. A contact named Rook who used to run patrol routes in this sector and who owed her nothing but might listen anyway. What she needed: the convoy's exact schedule, the Vrethkai fleet's most likely intercept point, and 6 hours. What she had to work with: less than 2 days before the convoy reached the Ocean corridor. She started the engines. The Ardent Crow lifted off from Verax Reach with the kind of slow, unremarkable exit that station logs would later describe simply as routine departure, single-occupant cargo vessel, human registration. 3 jumps later, she cut the transponder and engaged the shroud. The ship went dark and quiet, slipping through the space between star systems like something that was not there at all. The Vrethkai fleet was already moving. Dara could see their exhaust signatures on the long-range passive scanner, 4 ships, running close together, taking a route that had no cargo reason to exist. They were not rushing. They were confident. They had every reason to be. No one important had seen them. No patrol ship was tracking their heading. The convoy on the Ocean route had no military escort because the Compact did not assign escorts to medical supply runs going to Tier 3 adjacent colony worlds. It was not worth the budget. Dara watched the 4 signatures move across her screen and felt something she could not quite name settle into the center of her chest. It was not anger. It was not fear. It was the specific feeling she always got when she understood a problem clearly, when all the pieces were sitting in front of her and she could see exactly how they fit. She opened a channel on a silent band frequency and started composing a message to Rook. She did not tell him what she was planning. She just told him what she had heard, where the convoy was, and what the Vrethkai fleet's heading suggested. She told him in plain language, short sentences, nothing he would need to read twice. Then she closed the channel and started on the harder problem. The convoy needed to move. Not much, just enough. And it needed to move without knowing why, because if she explained why, there would be questions, and questions meant time, and time was the one thing she did not have extra of. She pulled up the convoy's public shipping manifest and started reading. Somewhere in the data, there was a way in. There always was. You just had to pay attention long enough to find it. Outside the shroud, the stars did not move. The ardent crow drifted in silence, invisible, while somewhere ahead of it a fleet of confident, well-armed ships sailed toward a convoy they were absolutely certain no one was going to warn. They were wrong, they just did not know it yet. Rook did not respond right away. That was fine. Dara had not expected him to. She used the silence to work. The convoy's public manifest was a dry document. Ship names, cargo weights, departure timestamps, expected arrival windows. Most people looked at it and saw paperwork. Dara looked at it and saw a schedule, and a schedule was a thing with gaps in it, and gaps were things you could use. The lead ship of the convoy was called the Marin's Hand. It was a mid-sized compact supply vessel, Thurvian-built, with a standard navigation array that received routine freight advisories from relay stations along the Ocean corridor. Those advisories came in data packets, compressed, time-stamped, signed with a relay station identifier. They adjusted ships' headings by fractions of a degree when debris fields or charged particle drifts made certain corridors unfavorable. The ships received them automatically. The navigation systems processed them without crew involvement unless the adjustment exceeded a certain threshold. Dara had spent 2 years running salvage near the old Thurvian relay infrastructure before she went legitimate. She knew how those packets were structured. She knew the signature format. She knew exactly how large a heading adjustment could be before the system flagged it for crew review. She started building a packet. It was slow work. She had to get the signature format exactly right, and she was doing it from memory and from 3-year-old notes stored on a drive she almost never opened. But she had time. The convoy was still 14 hours out from the intercept corridor, and she had learned patience from a city that taught its children early that the water did not care how frustrated you were. Rook came back on the channel 4 hours later. His voice was flat and careful the way it always was, the heavy gravity rumble of a Thurvian who had spent 30 years measuring his words before he spent them. He said, "I can't file a false maintenance flag. That is a career violation." Dara said, "I know." He said, "I also can't pretend I didn't receive this message." She said, "I know that too." There was a pause. Then he said, "The Marin's Hand runs a backup navigation check every 6 hours. The next one is in 2 hours and 40 minutes. If something adjusted their heading before that check, the backup system would validate the new course and log it as pilot confirmed." Dara said nothing. She waited. Rook said, "I'm not telling you anything actionable. I'm just nodding how their systems work, officially." He closed the channel. She finished the packet 20 minutes later. It was clean. The heading adjustment was small enough to fall under the crew review threshold by a margin of 0.003 degrees. The timing signatures were correct. The relay station identifier she used was a decommissioned station that still existed in the Compact's navigation database because nobody had gotten around to removing it. It would not raise a flag. Decommissioned stations sent junk data sometimes. Navigation systems were built to ignore junk and process valid packets. This packet was valid. She transmitted it and sat back. Then she did something that took longer than building the packet and required a different kind of patience entirely. The Vrethkai fleet's 4 ships were running close together. She had been watching their exhaust signatures on passive scan for hours. Exhaust signatures were not tracking signals. They were just heat and particle residue, the kind of thing a ship left behind the way a person left footprints. You could not follow footprints in real time. But if you knew the composition of a ship's fuel mixture, and if you had a passive sensor array sensitive enough, you could seed a tracer into the exhaust cloud that would bind to the specific particle signature and allow a long-range scanner to follow it. She had done something like this once before, during a salvage job gone sideways, to track a ship that had taken something that belonged to her. That time, she had to physically get close to the target ship to release the tracer. This time she did not, because she had already done it. 3 days ago on Verax Reach, while she was doing her calibration check, she had released 4 tracer seeds through the Ardent Crow's ventilation exhaust. The seeds were lighter than dust. They had drifted across 2 docking bays on the station's air circulation system. The Vrethkai ships had been docked for 6 hours. 6 hours was more than enough. She pulled up the tracer feed now. 4 signals moving together, exact heading, exact speed. She had known where they were going before she left Verax Reach. She had simply needed to confirm it. The confirmation was clean. She filed the data, coordinates, configuration, jump corridor approach angle, and split it into 3 separate compressed packages. She addressed them to 3 compact relay stations, 2 independent security firms, and 1 journalist on Verax Reach named Paul Varing, who had been writing about Vrethkai arms trafficking for 2 years and had never quite gotten the evidence he needed. She set the transmissions to send on a delayed timer. Not yet. She needed to be in position first. She pushed the Ardent Crow toward the intercept corridor, running dark and quiet, and thought about the look on Rook's face when he figured out what she had done with the information he had not officially given her. His mandibles would click, she was certain of that. She had never actually met a Thurvian who could stay surprised for long, but she thought Rook might manage it, just this once, if only for a moment. She let herself find that slightly funny. In the quiet way she allowed herself small things in the dark between stars, and then she put it away and focused on the problem in front of her. The fleet was close. It was time to go to work. The Vrethkai fleet dropped out of jump with the kind of precision that came from doing something many times and never once being caught doing it. 4 ships, tight formation, weapons systems warming but not yet active. The kind of restraint that looked professional until you understood it was just efficiency. No point spending energy on weapons until the target was in range. The convoy route stretched out ahead of them, empty and quiet and exactly where it was supposed to be. Except the convoy was not there. The lead ship's navigation officer ran a scan, then another. The corridor was clear. The Marin's hand and its 2 escorts were not on the Ashen route. They were not anywhere on the sensor grid. There was nothing in front of them except open space and the distant glow of a relay beacon. And then there was something else. It appeared on every sensor screen in every ship simultaneously. A single vessel, small, cargo-class human registration, running lights on, sitting in the middle of their formation like it had always been there, and was simply waiting for them to notice it. No weapons, no distress signal, no evasive movement, just sitting. The Vrethkai commander, Osk Durin, had survived 40 years in spaces where survival required being harder to frighten than the things trying to frighten you. He had never been surprised by a cargo hauler before. He took a breath, steadied himself, and opened a channel. He said, "Human vessel, you are in a restricted operational corridor. Identify yourself and state your purpose, or we will treat your presence as a hostile act." The response came back in under 2 seconds, which told him she had been ready for the call. She said, "My name is Dara Ness. I fly the Ardent Crow. My purpose is to let you know that 7 minutes ago I transmitted your fleet's current coordinates, formation configuration, jump corridor approach angle, and exhaust particle signature profiles to 3 compact relay stations, 2 independent security firms, and a journalist named Paul Varenk who has been looking for exactly this kind of data for about 2 years. Those transmissions are already gone. There is nothing you can do about them now. Duran said nothing for a moment. Then, you're bluffing. She said, I'm not recording this conversation. I already got everything I needed before I decloaked. This call is courtesy. He said, one cargo ship does not threaten this fleet. She said, I'm not threatening your fleet. Your fleet can do whatever it wants. I just wanted you to know what's already happened before you make a decision based on information that's no longer accurate. Duran muted the channel and looked at his sensor officer. The sensor officer was running a backtrack on the Ardent Crow's decloaking point, trying to figure out where it had come from, how long it had been there, whether the stealth technology matched anything in the compact's known human capability registry. The answer came back in 30 seconds. The stealth signature did not match anything in the registry. It was salvage-built, irregular, and completely effective. The fleet's sensors had not detected it at any point during their approach. The ship could have been sitting in that position for hours. Duran unmuted the channel. He said, How did you get inside our formation without triggering perimeter sensors? She said, You were focused on the corridor ahead. Nobody watches the space they've already passed through. He said, That's not an answer. She said, It's the only answer I have. You left a gap. I used it, that's all. He felt something he did not have a name for in his own language, so he reached for the closest translation he knew. The specific discomfort of realizing that something you considered beneath your attention had been watching you very carefully for a long time. He said, What do you want? She said, Nothing from you. I wanted the convoy to be somewhere else, and it is. I wanted those transmissions sent, and they're sent. I wanted to be here when your fleet realized the job was already finished before it started. That last part was personal. I'll admit that. Duran cut the channel. He looked at his navigation officer and said, Get me a read on those transmissions. Were they actually sent? The navigation officer pulled up the relay station logs. It took 4 minutes. The logs confirmed 3 separate incoming data packets from an unregistered source, received and stored at the relay stations 6 minutes before the fleet dropped out of jump. The security firms had already opened their packets. One had flagged the data for immediate review. The journalist had not opened his yet, but the delivery confirmation showed he had received it. The fleet sat in the empty corridor in silence. Duran thought about his options with the careful, methodical mind of someone who had always considered himself several steps ahead of any situation he walked into. He worked through each option. He worked through the outcomes. He worked through the counters. He came up empty every time. She had not beaten them with weapons or speed or numbers. She had beaten them before the fight started, by doing things so quietly and so early that by the time they arrived, the game was already over. The only move left to them was the one that confirmed everything she had already reported. He ordered his fleet to stand down. Then he ordered a slow withdrawal, not a jump, because jumping now would trigger the particle tracers she had mentioned, and he was no longer certain she was bluffing about those either. A slow withdrawal, engines at minimum, back the way they came. He did not open the channel to her again. He did not have anything to say. The Ardent Crow stayed where it was until all 4 ships had moved fully out of scanner range. Then its running lights dimmed, and it turned on a new heading, and it flew away through the dark at a speed that suggested a pilot with somewhere specific to be and no interest in being watched getting there. The corridor was empty again. Quiet, the way space was always quiet, except now it felt different, the way a room feels different after someone leaves it and you realize, standing there alone, that they understood it better than you did. Part 4, MD Copy. The compact High Council chamber was designed to make whoever stood at its center feel appropriately small. The ceiling was 40 meters high. The delegate tiers curved upward on all sides, 47 species arranged by seniority, the oldest civilizations at the top and the newer ones, the ones still proving themselves lower down. Humans did not have a seat in the chamber. They were a Tier 3 world. Tier 3 worlds did not get seats. The intelligence report arrived in the chamber on a standard priority flag, which meant it appeared on every delegate's screen simultaneously without warning or preamble. It was 3 pages long. Most intelligence reports required context and explanation before they meant anything. This one did not. A single human cargo hauler, unregistered stealth configuration, solo occupant, disrupted a 4-ship Vrethkai interdiction against a compact medical convoy, no weapons discharged, no compact assistance, no casualties. The chamber was quiet for a moment in the specific way that large rooms full of very intelligent beings go quiet when they all reach the same uncomfortable conclusion at the same time. Delegate Sara of the Ethan spoke first. The Ethan communicated through color shifts across their wide, flat faces, a language that could express 40 distinct emotional states simultaneously, which they considered evidence of their superiority over species limited to facial expressions and sound. Sara's current color said, "This is an anomaly and anomalies have explanations." She said, in the spoken trade language the council used for formal sessions, "This appears to be an isolated incident. One individual, one fortunate outcome. We should not draw large conclusions from small data points." The analyst who had been assigned to the report was a young Thurvian named Grev. He was not senior enough to normally speak in the council chamber. The chair had given him the floor because the chair had read the report twice and wanted someone else to explain it. Grev said, "With respect, delegate, the data point is not small." He pulled up the timeline on the chamber's main display. He walked through it without hurrying. Dara Ness had identified the threat by overhearing a conversation at a docking station. She had assessed the situation, contacted a retired patrol officer, built a fraudulent but technically valid navigation packet using knowledge of decommissioned Thurvian relay infrastructure, preceded exhaust tracers on 4 Vrethkai ships 3 days before the interception, transmitted actionable intelligence to 7 separate recipients on a time delay, positioned her ship inside the Vrethkai formation without triggering a single sensor, and decloaked at the precise moment that all other elements were already in place and irreversible. He paused. Then he said, "The entire operation was designed from the beginning so that by the time the Vrethkai knew something was wrong, there was nothing left for them to do about it. Every step she took made the next step possible. None of it required military training. All of it required understanding how systems work and what people do not bother to watch." Sora's color shifted. The specific sequence she displayed was one that Ethan cultural scholars later described, when reviewing records of the session, as recognition of a flawed premise one has held for some time. She said, "What is her background?" Grev said, "No military record, no intelligence affiliation. She did flood relief work in a coastal city on Earth's eastern seaboard for 4 years, then salvage running, then cargo hauling. She has 2 minor customs violations from 6 years ago, both related to the stealth shroud installed on her ship." A delegate from the Vrethkai observer block said, "She broke 17 compact articles. The stealth shroud alone." The chair said, "The stealth shroud alone saved a colony's medicine supply. We are aware of the articles. We will address them separately." The chamber moved on to the analysis portion. Grev presented the sections he found most significant, and the one that produced the longest silence was not the stealth technology or the navigation packet forgery. It was the exhaust tracers. Seeding passive tracers through ventilation exhaust at a docking station was not a technique in any compact intelligence manual. It was not in any known alien methodology for covert tracking. When Grev explained it, several delegates asked him to repeat the mechanism, because it sounded so simple that they assumed they had misunderstood it. They had not misunderstood it. It was that simple. She had released dust through her ship's vents while doing routine maintenance. The dust had drifted across 2 docking bays on the station's air circulation. The Vrethkai ships had been sitting in those bays. The dust had settled on their hulls. She had tracked a 4-ship combat fleet with something she released from her ventilation system during a calibration check. Delegate Mora of the Seth, a species that communicated through low-frequency sound and prided itself on analytical precision, said slowly, "Has anyone determined whether this level of improvised operational planning is typical for humans or specific to this individual?" Grev said, "We don't have enough data to answer that. That is part of what the review committee is recommending we address." The vote to open a formal review of Earth's developmental classification passed 41-6. The 6 who voted against it were not opposed to the review. They were opposed to what it implied, that the compact had been looking at humanity for 60 years and had been, in some important and uncomfortable way, looking at the wrong things. Sara did not vote against it. She changed color 3 times during the final count, a sequence that had no single clean translation, but that older Ethan delegates recognized as something like, "We decided what we were seeing before we looked." The session closed. The records were filed. Earth was not upgraded that day, not officially, not yet. But a door that had been closed for 60 years opened a crack, and in the hallways outside the chamber, in the quiet conversations between delegates who did not want their uncertainty on record, the same question kept surfacing. If she did all of that alone, with salvage parts and old notes and a ventilation system, what were the rest of them doing? Nobody had a good answer. That was, in its own way, the most significant thing that happened in the chamber that day. Copyashan IV did not look the way most colony worlds looked in compact survey images. Survey images were taken from orbit, where everything looked orderly: grid streets, dome clusters, landing pads marked with clean painted lines. From the ground, Ashan IV looked like a place that had been improvised slowly over 20 years by people who were trying their best with what they had. The docking pad was real metal in some places and poured composite in others. The perimeter fence had been repaired so many times, it was a different color every few meters. The ardent crow landed at the edge of the pad, away from the main cluster of colony buildings, which was habit. Dara preferred exits that did not require maneuvering past other ships. She had not told anyone she was coming. There was no one to tell. She had not contacted the colony administration or filed an arrival notice or sent a message to the medical team. She had simply changed her heading after leaving the Ashan corridor and followed the route she had flown twice before, when she was carrying food rations and the colony was having a different kind of bad year. She unloaded the 2 cases herself. They were heavy, emergency-grade suppressants were packaged in sealed atmospheric containers because they degraded in unregulated air, and the loading ramp on the Ardent Crow had a hydraulic fault she had been meaning to fix for 6 months, which meant the ramp stuck at a 20-degree angle and she had to lever the cases down by hand. She did it without particular drama. This was just how things were. A colony medic found her on the pad 17 minutes after she landed. The medic was young, Thurvian, broad-shouldered, with the characteristic plated skin of her species, but wearing a worn jacket with a hand-stitched patch on the left sleeve that said OSHEN Med in letters that someone with small, careful hands had done in blue thread. Her name, she said, was Bess. It was not a Thurvian name. Dara did not ask about it. She had been around long enough to know that people kept the names that meant something to them. Bess looked at the 2 cases on the pad, then at the ship, then at Dara. She said, "Who sent you?" Dara said, "Nobody." Bess said, "These are atmospheric sealed. These are emergency grade. Do you know what these cost?" Dara said, "I got them on salvage. Paid salvage price, not market price. It works out." Bess was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The convoy is still 11 hours out." Dara said, "I know." Bess opened one of the cases. She checked the seal codes, the batch numbers, the stability readings. Everything was within tolerance. She closed the case carefully, the way you close something you were afraid to damage. She said, "There are 41 children in the colony under the age of 6. The sickness hits them hardest. We have been rationing what we have for 3 weeks." Dara said, "I know that too." She did know. She had read the colony's public health filings on the way in, the same way she had read the shipping manifests and the relay station logs, because information was available if you looked for it, and looking for it was free. Bess asked for her name and her ship's registration, the standard intake questions for any incoming medical supply. Dara gave both. Bess wrote them down in a physical notebook, which surprised Dara slightly. Most colony administrators use datapads, but she did not say anything. Bess said, "Can I ask why you did this?" Dara thought about it. She said, "The convoy was going to be late. I had what you needed. That's the whole thing, really." Bess's mandibles clicked once. Dara had been around enough Thurvians to know that single click was not language. It was the involuntary sound a Thurvian made when they were processing something emotionally that their body could not quite contain. She had heard Rook make the same sound just once, in a very different context. She left Bess a freight contact frequency before she left, her standard rate card. No special terms noted, though she had already decided she would not charge for anything this colony needed while the outbreak was running. That was not a policy she announced. It was just a decision she had made somewhere between the Ocean corridor and the landing pad, and she saw no reason to make it into a speech. The Ardent Crow lifted off 2 hours before the medical convoy arrived. The colony's comm system was already busy by then. Word had spread through the settlement the way word always spread through small, scared communities. Fast, changed by every mouth it passed through. By the time Bess tried to tell the story accurately that evening at the colony's weekly gathering, she was already correcting a version in which Dara had fought off the Vrethkai fleet with the Ardent Crow's cargo ramp. She told the true version instead. It was less dramatic and more surprising, which in her experience meant it was the one worth keeping. 3 days later, she mailed a handwritten note to the Ardent Crow's registered address. She did not know if it would reach anyone. She sent it anyway, because her mother, a human woman who had come to Ocean IV before Bess was born and stayed because the colony needed a doctor, had always told her that the right gesture was worth making even when you could not be sure it landed. The note was 4 sentences. It said, "Thank you. The children are stable. We will remember the Ardent Crow. I hope whoever reads this knows they did something real." It was the kind of note that did not fit neatly into any official record. But the things that do not fit into official records are often the ones that last the longest, passed from hand to hand until they are worn soft at the edges, still readable, still true. Copy 3 months passed the way time passed in the shipping lanes, measured in cargo runs and fuel stops, and the slow accumulation of small decisions that added up to something, though you could rarely say exactly what until you looked back at it. Dara was at Verax Reach again. Same docking bay, same fuel coupling, same calibration tool. Different jacket, the old one had a tear in the left elbow she had never gotten around to fixing, and eventually she had accepted that some things you either fix or replace, and there is no third option. She was on her knees beside the rear landing strut, working the calibration slowly, the way someone would if they were checking a stubborn reading. Across the bay, a Vrethkai merchant noticed her. He was not one of the 2 from 3 months ago. He was simply a Vrethkai trader who had heard a story that had spread through the arms-dealing networks the way bad news always traveled fast, accurate at its center, distorted at its edges. He recognized the ship's registration painted on the hull. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he picked up his goods and walked out of the bay without completing his transaction, which cost him a fairly significant amount of money, and which he paid without complaining, because some costs were just the price of information. Dara noticed him leave. She did not say anything. She went back to her calibration check. Rook found her 40 minutes later. He had taken early retirement from the patrol service. The paperwork he would have had to file regarding his unofficial involvement in the Ocean Corridor situation would have eventually become a problem, and he had decided the problem was not worth the salary. He was carrying a datapad and wearing civilian clothes that fit him the way civilian clothes always fit a Thurvian who had spent 30 years in uniform. Technically correct, somehow unconvincing. He set the datapad on the Ardent Crow's wing without saying anything. Dara picked it up and read it. It contained 3 shipping route security problems that Rook had been tracking for years as a patrol officer and had never managed to resolve through official channels. One was a recurring pattern of cargo theft on the meth corridor that changed methods every 6 months in a way that suggested someone with access to patrol schedules. One was an unregistered station broadcasting false beacon signals near the Duran Shelf. One was a colony on the outer rim that had been receiving falsified aid manifests, supplies listed as delivered that had never arrived. Dara read through all 3. She did not say they were interesting. She said, "Does the outer rim colony have anything worth eating? I have been running standard rations for 2 weeks and I am tired of them." Rook's mandibles clicked twice. In Thurvian body language, the double click during a conversation meant something that did not translate cleanly into the trade language, but that any Thurvian would understand immediately. "I thought you would say exactly that, and I came here anyway, which means I have already decided something without quite admitting it to myself yet." He sat down on a cargo crate near the landing strut. He said, "The colony grows a legume that the settlers call ground pod. It is nutritionally adequate. I cannot speak to the taste." Dara said, "I'll try anything once." She handed the datapad back. He shook his head and left it with her. They did not discuss terms or rates or what exactly their arrangement was. Some things do not need to be named to be real. Rook had spent 30 years doing things by the book and had one good outcome to show for it. The outcome being that when the book failed, he had known enough to pass information to someone who was not bound by it. He had made his peace with that. The piece was sitting here, on a cargo crate, in a docking bay that smelled like burnt fuel, next to a ship he had been officially pretending not to know about for 3 months. The message from Delegate Sora's office arrived while Dara was refueling. It came through the Ardent Crow's registered address, formatted as a standard compact acknowledgement of service, the kind they sent to contractors who had provided useful support on a case-by-case basis. The language was formal and said nothing specific. At the very bottom, below the official seal and the administrative sign-off, were 3 words in plain text with no official formatting and no explanation. "We see you." Dara read it once. She read it again. Then she saved it to a folder she kept on a drive she did not open often. The folder had a handful of things in it. A photo of a flooded street from her hometown, taken the second time the water came in, when she was 11 years old and had decided in the cold and the wet that somebody had to do something and it might as well be her. A scan of Bess's handwritten note from Ocean IV, 4 sentences, worn soft at the scan edges from being read more times than she would admit. A short message from a salvage partner she had worked with for 2 years before going legitimate, which said only, "You're going to be fine." She closed the folder and closed the drive and finished the refuel. The Ardent Crow lifted off from Verak's reach on a clear heading, transponder active, stealth shroud dormant. The galaxy was watching now more carefully than before, with more uncertainty than before, which was the most honest thing it had managed in 60 years of looking at Earth and deciding it already knew what it was seeing. Dara set her heading for the outer rim. There was a colony with a legume problem and a falsified manifest, and somewhere in the data there was a way in. There always was. You just had to pay attention long enough to find it.